And welcome back to the CODESHO podcast, everybody. Let's get straight to the first question, Matt. Do you like Agile?
Okay. Yeah. So, I didn't. It's interesting and possibly controversial to me, and the reason is because
Be careful, y'all. Matt can go savage mode like that.
I mean, well, that's the thing is I'm passionate, and I said earlier when I was talking with somebody I'm going to go on a rant, and it was the most calm rant ever. Fair-minded, because I'm not actually.
I just want everybody to know when Matt gets in his rant savagery mode, it's like the most polite thing you've ever heard.
To be fair, and I'm not saying these people aren't important, but
Yeah.
But
and I want to respect your opinion, but
I'm willing to hear other sides.
Yeah.
And these are all things that I'm about to
You're
say.
genuine
right
though. You really are genuine with it.
Yeah. But that's the thing is, okay, so I'll even start from the beginning. When I was in school, we learned about Agile. So when I started school in 2006, to do programming. That was the first I had ever heard about it. And we didn't even call it that. Maybe we called it Scrum, but we did daily stand-ups. Then I went and was teaching for school, and we were teaching that same stuff. We were having our students do daily stand-ups. And that was basically it. We talked about a Scrum board, where we didn't even do story points, but it's just here's the work I'm going to do. It's more like a to-do list. In 2014, I don't remember if it was 2014 or 2015, towards the end of my teaching career, Jeff Sutherland, the guy who invented Scrum, came out with a book talking about him. So I read it way back then, and it seemed in line with what we were doing. It was just okay. I mean, I don't know. It seems like software developers always do this process where it's just small teams deciding what you're going to work on. In school, it wasn't as important, but we just wanted to get people used to the idea. In my first job, so that was my introduction to it. When I got to Scrum, yeah, and I had heard these words Agile. When I got my first job, when I started looking, when I got my programming job that wasn't a teacher, all of these jobs said do you have experience in an Agile or Scrum environment? And I was yeah, I used to teach it or talk about it or whatever. But I never think I'm an expert. I don't think I'm an expert programmer, right? I think that I'm good, and I hope I can learn from you and you and you and you and you. Again, that's my rant. Super polite. And the way that they were doing it was different and more rigid than... and we knew about waterfall as well. We talked about, when I was a teacher, we talked about waterfall. We talked about extreme programming and pair programming. So I knew these concepts. But you could even say, and it would be fair to say, oh, well, you never did it professionally. So when I get to these companies and they're doing it different than we taught it, I was okay, they have product owners and project managers and a Scrum Master, and that's fine, right? And at one of my companies, I was just really shocked, and we can talk about that, where they wanted to plan 6. So I also noticed that everyone did 2-week sprints. Mm-hmm. And I was okay, but there's nothing about it that says it has to be a 2-week sprint. So I started seeing this pattern. I was why is it always a 2-week sprint? Is that just the best? And then at one point at one of my companies, they said when I got interviewed, they said they were an Agile environment, and it felt very waterfall. And all that, very strict deadlines. We're going to plan this out. You're going to have this much time to test it. Then it's going to be handed over to QA, and then it's going to be done, scheduled for release. And that company actually, eventually they wanted to plan out 6 weeks or 6 sprints planned out, which means 12 weeks or
They were 2-week sprints.
2-week sprints. So they wanted what is that, 3 months? Yeah, 3 months of, so 12 weeks is 3 months of planning. And that just sounded very waterfall to me. And then eventually that Scrum Master did quit. Another Scrum Master got hired, and that same that person also just seemed very much focused on the process. And so I started reading about it a little bit. But the stuff that I was reading wasn't project manager stuff. I was reading stuff by some programmers, the programmers that I knew who had started this, but all I could read about was code. They would talk about code a lot, and so I still just really didn't understand it. I'm not sure. Anyway, that's my experience with it. And I still feel like I'm curious where you're going. I can keep talking, but I want to hear what you're.
Well, okay, so here's where my mind is at right now, is that I would assume that anybody listening to this that has ever heard or been involved in a team that uses even just these terms, Scrum, Agile, Waterfall, like what does this mean? So I think what we should really do, I think that we have a very, I mean, really, for the last few weeks, actually, you and I have spent a lot of time looking into this, like, and trying to find the objective meaning of these terms. Because, like you said, like in the world of programming, this is like the most inconsistent thing from company to company.
Yeah.
It would seem like the owners, or not the owners, but the creators of like Agile invented it so that you could have some consistency from company to company.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that really didn't happen. If anything, it just mucked the waters more than they already were. But it is a great platform. What they were trying to accomplish was great.
Yeah.
So
maybe we can't even back up.
Well, because the point that the thing that I wanted to do was say, like, objectively speaking, can we talk about what Scrum means, what Agile means, and what waterfall means? Yeah.
So waterfall was the method. I think it was invented by NASA back in like the 60s. It was like a methodology, or I don't know if that was just like the angry name for it. I don't know if there was like an official name.
Well, we look at it negatively, but I don't think they did back then.
Well, they didn't back then, but I think in general in the software field everyone does. So the idea is you have like somebody has an idea for a project, they collect all, like they make the plan, they collect all of the requirements, they make the plan, they pass it off to a team, that team collects all the requirements, they pass it off to a team who might like architect it, like actually plan it out without coding it. Then they pass that off to the developers, and then the people who, once they finish developing it, like end to end, then they pass it off to like the testers, and then they test it, and then they get delivered.
It's built for a very dependency based workflow.
Yeah.
I need this done to get this done. This needs to get done for this to get done.
Yeah. And so and it's based on some assumed timeline.
Right.
And that's part of the problem. That was the problem is in the real world, what people found out is those deadlines are like never accurate because it's complex.
Not only that, but in modern software, you're releasing updates constantly.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you could build out a feature and you could plan that, and potentially you could use waterfall to say like, hey, we've got this thing 6 months from now that needs to get released. We need this to get done, for that to get done, that to get done, for that to get done. Yeah. But like you said, it's really hard unless you have a massive company to accomplish that, because in reality, you're always having to respond to the needs of the business now, not 6 months from now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we can have long-term goals and we can plan those out. And I don't think we'll talk about Agile in a second, but I don't think the Agile is like the lack of that structure. You can still have structure with Agile, but
smaller.
Yeah, more attainable, more, I don't know, like it seems like with Agile you're going to be. Well, let me pause. You were talking. I don't want to. We're talking about waterfall still. Continue.
Yeah. Well, and so some of the, what were they saying? Well, so I was reading this book and they were talking about just like the general example. Even like let's say you have a good team of smart coders, which I think was an example in like NASA. So like the best team at NASA could do it, or whatever. Like the best team at IBM or Bell Labs. I think he was using Bell Labs as an example. And so like they had this smart group of people. They would get the requirements, like they're promising to deliver in 18 months, and they would deliver in 18 months. And it would be, again, this is like the best group of programmers. Sure. They were able to do it. The problem was the customers' needs changed. And that was in the 60s, right? Whereas now, like you said, we can like what iPhone is going to be out, or what new iPhone, or what new, Casanova phone or like iPhone competitor is going to come out 18 months from now.
Yeah.
We can't possibly predict. And so that was like people smarter than me and older than me realized that this wasn't a good solution. And the real world fact, again, in that case at Bell Labs, they were like a smart group of people who could deliver, even though like the client requirements were changed. In actuality, a lot of software was like millions of dollars over budget. Like in the actual Scrum book that we'll talk about, he was working for the FBI, and they were trying to build all of their, like they were trying to update the system so everything wasn't just like pen and paper, and so that you could track down terrorists or whatever, and you could cross-reference stuff. But it was like millions of dollars over budget and only like half done, or something like that. And so it's just it was reliant too much on charts and documentation that were always wrong.
Yeah.
And that's what waterfall was.
So is it fair to conclude that really, and I don't even mean this negatively, but just the way we look at waterfalls, pretty much an old school structure for structuring programming projects or anything really.
Yeah.
But it is just that. It's old school because it doesn't really consider nearly as much as something like Agile the real modern day software world, which is that you really have an obligation to your user base to be constantly improving the software, constantly releasing updates.
Yeah.
For sure, accounting for new software that's come into the market that competes with yours. I mean, like we do have to recognize that even though I think they came out with Agile, almost probably a little under 20 years ago.
2001 is when.
2001. Yeah, I was going to say it was about 20 years ago. But the thing is, like, they were actually, I think, even at the time, ahead of their time, because this was like right when software was really starting to change, because it wasn't until, honestly, like the mid 2000s to 2010 when things started getting into like, we're doing on the air software updates and stuff like that. Like prior to that, you were able to ship software and it was like, okay, well, this has to work in a production environment and we can't do anything about it. And honestly, to me, waterfall for software like that seems like if you got a bunch of really smart people together, you got some really, what's the word I'm looking for? Some really like disciplined project managers. It does seem like that's the process that they would come up with. And it seems like it would work. But again, it's old school, it's outdated, and that's not how the real world works anymore.
If you can properly manage the complexities and the really smart team, devs and everybody included, can properly estimate how long it's going to take each feature, or again, because it's the whole team, the people who are coming up with like the architecture, the people who are getting the requirements, like,
which by the way, like we know this, that is hard. Like coming up with realistic estimations for how long something's going to take to build is all but impossible. It's really hard.
And that's a big part of the problem. That's
a
big part of the problem. Yeah. Like I think that we're smart. I know we work with other smart people, and throughout my career I've worked with smart people. And people are wrong a lot of the time. It's because it's not because this X feature or this piece is actually that tough. It's that it's interacting with other pieces. Software's complex. That's just how it is.
It's gotten way more complex, obviously, in the last 10 or 20 years than it ever was before.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I would say for me, the two hardest things in programming, one is estimating how long it's going to take to do something, and two, naming things. Little programmer joke for you there. Yeah, I mean, it's really, really tough, especially when, again, the business needs are always changing. Like for me, I mean, how many times do we say, like, at any job that we've had, this thing would take me 2 weeks, and typically we're very logical people, so we're looking at it like if I had 2 weeks to work on this thing straight, I'd get that done.
With no interruptions,
with no interruptions, and I mean, the reality is that's just not, that's not going to happen. But the thing I like about Agile, as we kind of segue into that, is like it accounts for that. It's like, we recognize that needs are going to change, and that's not necessarily the end of the world if something does come in like, we are not going to look down upon that because we realize that it's a reality for a lot of companies.
So how would you, like, obviously don't try to do a formal definition, and we're going to look at the Agile Manifesto, but in your thoughts from where you are now, or even thinking back like 2 weeks, how would you roughly define what you thought Agile was?
Well, I would say, okay, so I mean, I'm still not like even,
that's why
I'm not a project manager at the end of the day, but
that's
I
why,
would say,
it doesn't matter, but like, what do you think of it?
So let me answer this two-part. let me answer this in the first part, which is what I think most people think Agile means.
Okay.
Because to me, it's like, I feel like people, companies, all sorts of people, like, the problem is, you said it best at the beginning. You've worked with a bunch of companies that said that they were Agile. They weren't. And unfortunately, that's an environment that a lot of new developers are growing up in. So they're like, oh, yeah, sure, I've worked in an Agile environment. Yeah. Well, when in reality, that wasn't it at all.
That's not it at all, yeah.
And so all that you're really doing is drawing all of the conclusions or all of the similarities that you had between these companies that said that they did Agile, even though they didn't. And what you end up with is something like, well, Agile pretty much is just a way for us to pivot and move. And like a lot of people, that's the extent of their understanding is like, yeah, it's just a way that instead of planning things long term, we're planning things short term, and we're pivoting as necessary.
Yeah.
Which is part of it.
I'm okay with that. Yeah.
But I feel like that's most people's understanding. And then you get into this whole world of everybody saying like, well, everybody's interpretation is unique. And as we've come to find out, especially as we've dove more into it in the last couple of weeks, is like, there's not as much interpretation as I think people want there to be. Yeah. They want there to be like this thing where it's like it can conform to whatever company style, and like all that it means is, I honestly think a lot of people look at it as like a badge for their company. Like if these CEOs go to their meeting, oh yeah, we're Agile.
We're Agile, yeah.
It's like, really, that's not. It's
my
not
Scrum Master is triple certified.
Yeah,
or whatever. Like I don't know.
Exactly, and like that's frustrating because it's like that. No, there's some very specific rules here. So for me, my understanding now as a developer, and by the way, this is designed around developers. It's designed around software development.
Yes.
So my understanding now is. The problem is at this point, I would honestly just be reciting the manifesto more than anything that we're about to show here in a second. But basically, we are prioritizing collaboration between employees over almost anything else. Well, collaboration with employees, responding to business needs as they come, and honestly not finding fault in that. I feel like that's not specifically written in the manifesto, but like that's the big takeaway for me is I've worked for a lot of companies that look really down upon having to pivot all of a sudden, or having like they want to beat themselves up so hard because we've got this feature that like needs to come in right now. Like I've literally worked for people that are like, well, we need to get this done, but we don't want to interrupt this sprint. It's like, why? Like, is that that a better business goal? Like, is that a better initiative for us right now? Let's tackle that. So I mean, that was long-winded, but that's my answer is like really more than anything, again, collaborating, responding to business needs, and not like dismissing or looking down upon having to make sudden changes that work better for the business.
So my initial answer was exactly what you said. Like being able to pivot, like literally the word agile. Like I just think of like Gambit from X-Men. One of his superpowers was like, or like Spider-Man or whatever, like agility. Like I used to read all these cards. He could jump around and balance and move and shift, and like, okay, so that's what I always treated Agile as. And I came at it from the perspective of a programmer, and so I tried to write my code flexible. Like I write my code like reusable, flexible ways. And the reason is because it's like that was one of the things I learned when like it was drilled into me in my school, is that code always changes. Like code, whether it is, I mean like, the requirements are going to change maybe halfway through the sprint or halfway through the feature build, but also once that feature's out, like you said, software evolves and changes as your user base evolves and changes, and so that code needs to change. So I thought about it from the coding standpoint as well as just being able to pivot, like you said, like on business needs. So that's where I came from. Yeah.
Why do you think that? Because, well, let me pull this up real quick. First of all, let's pull up the manifesto, and let's just read. For anybody that is in the software world, honestly, should read this. It'll take you 30 seconds to read. There's also 12 principles down here that you can also take a look at. But we're on agilemanifesto.org, and really what it says is, I could read it. We are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation. I really like that one, and I feel like that doesn't get enough credit because that's more of like a direct like, hey, this is how you should run your business, not just organize things.
Yes, yeah.
So that one's kind of cool. Responding to change over following a plan. I mean, this is literally the most significant probably of them all.
Yeah.
And then they say that is, while there is value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. And so, I mean, this is what I'm talking about. Like, I feel like a lot of people haven't read this. And I even told you, as a developer, shame on me. I remember a guy that I used to work with, he showed me this years ago, and I was really too young, too early in my career to understand what this meant. And also, I just kind of thought this was funny because I'm like, we're not doing this. Like, we're not doing this now. So this means very little to me, even though I'm on a team that says that we're agile. And really, I hadn't taken another look at this again until just a couple days ago when you had brought it up. And it's crazy now looking back at this, like how profound it is. Like, this makes it very clear.
I think it makes it very clear. Like, if you have a choice between doing, like, going left or going right, or going, like, direction A or direction B, like, well, what does the manifesto say? If we're going to live in an agile environment, what does the manifesto say?
Yeah.
Right? Now, I do understand that we do live in the real world. And so, okay, like, maybe, like, I would never say, like, this is gospel or this is the Bible. So maybe sometimes you have to, I don't know.
Like, there are going to be long-term initiatives that you're going to have to break this a little bit.
Stuff like that, yeah. But the thing is, like, that doesn't even seem to break it. Like, you can have a roadmap. I don't think having a roadmap of, like, hey, here's where I want the app to go. Here's where I want our business to go. Here's where I want my life to go. Where do you see yourself in 10 years? Blah, right?
Yeah,
now, of course, that might change.
Yep.
Like, when I went to school, I didn't see myself teaching in Korea for 5 years. I did it, and I loved it, right? And then I used to say, I'm going to live in Korea forever. When are you going to move? I used to say, people thought it was funny. I would say, "Chugul dekaji." Like, my pronunciation is probably messed up, but, like, until I die. Like, like, how long? And they just loved it. Like, oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
The foreigner saying it like that. And then I moved back to America. So it's like, there's nothing wrong with having, like, okay, where's my vision? But then being able to change it based on short-term, like updates.
Yeah. I think you mentioned this is not gospel, and I agree with that. But one thing I would say, and so one thing we do at work at our current job is the company has a set of core values that are brought up pretty often. Like, if somebody's, kind of going outside of those, we say, hey, let's rein that back in. We need to pay attention to this. And then underneath that, our department, we created a set of core values. One of which is don't create a problem until it's a problem. And that's, I think, one of all of our favorites, because it's one thing that when we're in the middle of a debate, it's very easy to say, well, look, we all agreed to this already. You're making a problem out of something that, and you can't be egotistical, but most of the time we're not. Most of the time, if somebody says that, it's like, you're right. Okay, I'm creating a problem out of a problem. So what I think this does is, while it's not gospel, it's a way it's a tool. I mean, whenever you're sitting there in a meeting and you're going back and forth about whether or not we should do X, Y, or Z, it's like, hey, well, let's refer back to this. It feels like, maybe, for example, you're planning something too far into the future, or you're trying to make really permanent plans based on something. Let's refer back here.
So here's an example from a different company that I worked for. Because I remember my boss at the time talking to another employee, and we have these 2-week sprints, and within the 2-week sprints, we're trying to get these entire features out, right? Whether they're small or not, that includes, like, the QA portion. And the back-end developer, he missed the deadline. He missed it because he was refactoring something, because he could see in the future, okay, like, we're doing the same thing 2 or 3 times. Let me refactor, and then, okay, it might take me an extra day or two, but, like, long term, this is solving a problem, and it's like solving a problem that we need right now. Obviously, like, as a programmer, we don't want to repeat ourselves. Like, dry code, don't repeat yourself. So he was doing some refactoring, and so he missed the sprint goal, and then the boss came up to him, and he wasn't yelling at him. They were friends, but he was saying, like, okay, like, I understand from the programmer's point of view, like, we want to do that, but, like, we have to hit our goals. So, like, and so he was basically saying, like, do worse code now, and then we'll deal with these problems in the future. And I do understand there's a trade-off, but I also know at that company they were doing a lot of those trade-offs.
Yeah.
And I have worked at companies where they did a lot of those trade-offs, and 15 years later, like, we were the ones stuck with, like, I didn't work there for 15 years. I came in new to all this software that was 15 years old and just garbage. And so I think that was one of the problems. Is that's why I like, again, I don't know which one's the most important, but individuals and interactions over processes and tools. We had this process there, and that was that's where I think it was gone too far. They were stuck on the process. Okay, well, we have these 2-week sprints, and you didn't meet your sprint goal. Well, I'm trying to improve the software because we know where we're going with this.
Yeah.
And I think that's when it starts getting into trouble.
Yeah. See, this makes me wonder. I mean, it seems inevitable that some group of people would encounter all of these problems, especially software developers who, I mean, one thing that software developers are really good at is identifying things that happen all the time and finding ways of automating them or making them easier or breaking them down. I mean, this is like the whole concept of any framework that you've ever worked with, is trying to eliminate all of the extra code that you have to write over and over again. Yeah. So, it seems, with that in mind, it seems inevitable that eventually some group of software developers would come along and say, we're going to create these systems to help solve some of these problems and create some unity from company to company. Unfortunately, like we said, it hasn't worked super well because although the framework is really good, companies don't follow it directly. And I think the reason for that is because of this idea that we can subscribe to these frameworks, but we can kind of put our own twist on them. And this is a big problem for startups. And I just wonder why. You know, like we say, like a sprint is 2 weeks, but that's arbitrary. It could be whatever it is for your company.
Yeah, 1 week to 6 weeks. I've heard.
But I do wonder, like, why hasn't somebody come along and say, like, look, although at some point when your company grows, you could decide to tweak this whatever way you want. Here is a framework that literally covers everything. Like, it's probably the reason is. The problem with doing something like this is probably that it would be really hard to actually like learn and whatever. But like, I don't know, like if somebody came along and said like, look, maybe a good framework for a new company is the sprints are 2 weeks. If you have a bug that doesn't make it out of the first sprint, this is what you do in the second sprint. This is how you cope with that. It just seems like there's a good framework, but there's the problem with all of these is the edge cases that you don't that are not factored in. And I wish somebody could come along and solve those. I mean, I guess this is the role of a project manager. This is what they're designed to do. But like, for example, you bring up a good point that I want to talk about, which is that like we've all worked at a company where we got to the end of a sprint, QA tested something, we were expecting to release it in the following sprint or whatever, and it didn't make it out for whatever reason. And we realized that it was going to take another whole sprint or something to do it. Every single company that I've worked for handles that situation differently. Why is there not some unifying framework that helps companies determine how they should handle that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I guess I'm not.
It's not a question that we're going to be able to answer, course, but it's like.
Well, here's one of the problems, and this is why we even started talking about this, because it seems like, I think, it seems like the way that programmers actually program is the Agile way. Right, like if left on their own. By the way, all of these people are super famous programmers and authors, all throughout like the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I mean they're still alive. Some of them are still alive, right? So it was invented by programmers, like for software development. But the problem is when you get a business involved, I think there's two things that have hurt it. There's nothing to measure here.
That's a good point.
Like there isn't necessarily anything to measure. And so that I can understand how that makes a boss as you go up the chain. Like, well, when is this feature going to be done? Like, you know, we do got money to make, right? And so of course you can't say, oh, it's going to be done in 6 months, hopefully. That was part of the problem with waterfall. But I think that Agile actually does address this, and that's why they want to focus on like the idea is they want to focus on working software. And there's in one of the principles here, I was pulling it up because you were talking about it, is well, first of all, business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. So you're not necessarily measuring anything, but like It's in the 12 principles.
Yeah, right here.
Okay, yeah. Business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. So it's not something that like somebody can just check in every week and say like, give me a progress report. I just don't think it works that way. And then also, where was it? Build projects. The next one. Build projects around motivated individuals. Give them the environment and support they need, and trust them to get the job done.
Yeah.
That's also really difficult. Again, if you don't have great devs, that can be scary, or like it just doesn't work. I think that's the hard part, is you need motivated individuals. Again, but how do you quantify that? And so as a boss or a manager or a middle manager or whatever, you want to be able to quantify. And that's why people like things like the Gantt charts, which was like whatever. It doesn't matter what a Gantt chart is, just a project timeline, which I'm not giving the right definition, but just imagine a project timeline with like these hard set deadlines. Of course, as a manager or a boss, okay, cool. This feature will be done in 3 months. Like that makes me happy.
Yeah.
The other thing I worry about, again, this is where it's controversial. I'm not trying to be controversial. I understand that sometimes programmers are weird. So programmers, So like programmers are hopefully good at programming, but they're not necessarily like the most organized. Maybe they're organized with code. They're like, they might think in a certain way and not in other ways, not leadership ways, not organizational ways, not like big picture, but hopefully they can solve problems. So I understand that multiple types of individuals can come together and collaborate on a team and make things work. But one of the things that I don't know 100%, but it seems like the Scrum, this is just my guess. So again, that's why it's controversial. The Scrum certification has hurt. I don't know if it's hurt actually, but like I think that's not necessarily a good thing. I think a lot of people are becoming Scrum Masters or Scrum certified, but they don't actually know how to build software. Again, that doesn't have to be the requirement, but like they're not necessarily learning. Again, that's why it's controversial, and like we can disagree on this. They're not necessarily learning those 4 things that were up at the top. They're learning, okay, 2-week sprints. Let's do a daily stand up, and you ask those 3 questions, which is all true. Let's do story points. And so like they're learning this method without learning the necessarily like behind it, or the fact that this stuff doesn't always work. Like story points don't always work. Well, what do you do when story points don't work? But they're supposed to work.
Maybe the best solution the reality is that definitely not all project managers are going to understand software development. They're not all going to be engineers. And I actually think, like you said, that's actually super okay.
That's not a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing. It's it's not frustrating because of them. It's frustrating that that's the reality of life, is that people are going to get specialized most likely in one thing. Yeah. But there's no doubt that like there's just as much complexity to being a project manager or a Scrum Master as there is to engineering something. I have no doubt about that.
I believe that.
People are the most complicated thing on the planet.
I have a huge gap in my knowledge related to what those roles specifically are supposed to do. So I do believe that. I'm not just trying to disrespect everybody.
Yeah. Well, I think the problem is that I've worked with a handful of really, really solid project managers in my life, but I have worked with a dumpster full of bad ones. And that's the frustrating part.
To be fair, I've also worked with a dumpster full of bad programmers.
That's true.
Just to be fair.
That's for sure true. I've definitely worked with more bad programmers than, but that's the thing. So I think the way that we solve this problem mostly is communication. Yeah. And one of my favorite things in these 12 principles is deliver work. Oh no. Where am I at? Here we go. The most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. Yeah. That's one way to solve this problem. And I think a lot of companies like right now during the COVID crisis are struggling with this because they were formerly in office, face-to-face conversing companies, and then they went remote, and that can be a struggle for sure. Being remote does not mean that you can't have face-to-face conversation, but there has to be processes in place to make sure that's happening. Now, me saying that is in and of itself a little bit controversial because I just talked about having a process for, having face-to-face conversation, and this may be one of those little nuances that, but like even if it's not a process, just having a routine is more what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Agile, like we've talked about, is not the lack of process. It's just prioritizing other things over that.
Yes.
And maybe I'm overemphasizing it. Maybe meeting with people is just a routine rather than a process. But it should be one. Like the more that we talk, the more we can converse with each other, the more, I mean, literally, you've got all of these.
On this bottom one right here, the best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. So again, like you need those motivated individuals, hopefully aligned with like to some goal. And the way that I've known really good developers is you give them some challenge, and really good developers will come together and be like, well, how would we do that? Let's get that. And then they can get excited about it.
Yep.
And so I understand it doesn't have to be exactly like a process, but it's the people. I definitely think it's the people over the process.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much going on here, but I want to talk about two more of these that you had kind of mentioned. Going back a little bit to what you were just saying a second ago about the problem for bosses is typically that measurement problem.
Yeah.
In these principles, they talk about that as well. This sucks because it's not measurable in the sense of like having a number to identify.
What percent are you done? I'm 71% done.
Yeah, and that sucks. But working software is the primary measure of progress.
There you go. Yeah.
I mean that is a measurement, and unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, if you're a business owner, that is you got to trust that. I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like if that is your measurement, it's unfortunate that it's a little bit more abstract, but I mean, that's one way of doing it. The other thing in here that kind of talks about the same thing is build projects around motivated individuals, give them the environment and support they need, and trust them to get the job done.
Yeah.
That last line must be the hardest part for a business owner. But hopefully, if you've had developers on your team for a long time, I get that you got to start somewhere, but if you've had developers on your team for a long time, hopefully you've established that trust and that like desire to have to like watch over and measure percentages will dwindle as you become more trusting in that person. The other part of this, the two part of that's really hard is to trust that somebody's going to get a job done on time. That's hard in and of itself. The harder thing is when they don't deliver on time and they say, just trust me, like this got more complex. This was more complicated than I thought it was. Not only do you need to trust them then, you also need to trust them the next time they tell you that they're going to get something done and that they've factored in all the complexities.
So this is also part of the reason why I like the concept of Agile, because the way I think about it, or even Basecamp has something, they call their system Shape Up. And it is basically, it is roughly Agile. They happen to do 6-week sprints. They pick a feature. They do a kickoff where like they really discuss it and roughly plan out, okay, well, what can we actually get done in 6 weeks? Like they were in their book, they talk about like, well, we want a calendar feature. Well, we can't get a full calendar with all these features. But what if there's just like a high level overview with dots when there's events? You can click on those dots and see something. So like they kind of roughly scope it out, and then they call it, instead of story points, they call it like appetite or something. Do we still want to work on this feature? So after the end of 6 months or 6 weeks, if they're not done with it, they go like, okay, well, it obviously took longer than we wanted. Do we still want to work on this feature? And that's where I think the priorities become so important. We did this I don't want to talk about it too much, but on the app that we were building, we very much got out an MVP, right? Like the initial launch of the app actually was by a different project owner, and that didn't go well. But then I think we talked about that before, right?
Talking about V2?
V1. Oh, I guess it would have been V2, not the React Native one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one didn't go that well. But then
bust.
What?
I said bust.
Yeah. But then we started doing it, just taking that React Native one and then turning it native. And it didn't have in-app purchases. It didn't have a whole bunch of features, but we just got...
Neither did the first one.
Yeah, neither did the first one. But it was native. And that was it. That was like, okay, what's our MVP? Let's do this. Let's get a code base, but have it native. And then we can jump off of that. Then we talked with the bosses. What's the next feature we want? Well, we want people to be able to buy stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So then we got that. And then what's the next feature? What's the next feature? And that's how we worked. And so like in-app purchases took even longer on Android than on iOS, but you still had some trouble.
Well, hold on. Let's back up real quick. Let's talk about this for a second, because I hate whenever we talk about things that sound like we're like tooting our own horn or whatever. Mm-hmm. But if there was an example for a business owner of what you should hope that your employees would do, I think that we did the right thing. And I think we should talk about that. So yeah, we built a React Native app. It was good, and it served the purpose of having a mobile application that supplemented the website or whatever. So we had that. Again, no purchases, which sucks because obviously as a business you want to monetize everything you've got and whatever. So then we started, without too much detail, we started working on a new version that basically completely scrapped the old design, scrapped the old everything.
This was also going to be native. This is when I got hired.
Yes, this was
because you did the React Native app all by yourself.
Yeah,
you had like a short deadline, like 2 months.
You
also got out an MVP. Originally, it was going to be Vue.
Yeah, Vue native script.
Vue native script, which you said again. There's so many pieces here. Self-organizing teams, motivated individuals.
Yeah.
You knew Vue, but you didn't know React.
Well, no. So that's a good. Let me back up. So with all of that, I got hired based on my skills in Vue, and they had thought that they wanted to build an app in Vue native script. I don't think anybody, including me, really knew much about Vue native script other than you can write apps in Vue, and it seems like it's decently supported, maybe. Okay. Who knows? So then I came in, and I think this was my first opportunity to showcase my ability to make decisions and reason and whatever. So I started building it. I started bootstrapping something in Vue native script, again, as somebody that had never used it before. And I don't know where it's at right now, Vue native script, but it just was not it. Like
I had never even heard of this.
I was like, this is not going to work, especially if you guys want to be like serious in this industry. Like, this isn't going to work. We need to do something else. So I had worked with React on the web before, also hadn't worked with it as a app platform, but I was also an app developer. So I was like, this can't be, like, I understand the app ecosystem.
Yeah.
This can't be that bad. So, and it wasn't. I did it, and it worked well. The idea was that I had to get an app out in 2 months, and I thought maybe this will be faster than having to write 2 different platforms. So, anyways, I'm rambling about whatever.
No, it's good.
Yeah, so that was my first place. Then you came in, and we were going to build a completely new application.
Well, the project managers, again, I don't know the titles, but like some leadership roles got hired after you, but before me.
Well, literally right before you.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. Obviously, I wasn't there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you between me deploying the first version and you getting hired, it was only like a month and a half or so. Yeah, maybe less. But anyways, yeah. So we were going to build like a completely new application, and where are we going with this?
Well, it was scoped out. Like, it ended up being scoped out because I remember, like, you had already started. You had like a month, a month ahead of me. And it was like scoped out.
That's right. We were going to build iOS and Android, and I had already started on iOS. Yeah. I wasn't very far, though.
Yeah, you weren't. And I mean, nothing was very far, but it was scoped out. It was massively scoped out. And then I just remember it was going to be done in May. And I also just remember, like, I had spent 80 hours on a single animation or something like that. And I was just like, oh, is that important? I remember thinking that, but I'm like brand new, so I didn't know. Okay,
it was a very UI intense application that was not really centered around. I mean, you say it was scoped out, and you're right in terms of like, the UI of the application, but like the actual functionality doesn't matter. Anyways, we realized more or less a couple months later, this is not the direction the company's going. We completely decided to scrap that entire application, and you and I were left with not a lot of like direction in terms of like where we're going to go next. So we literally were sitting there kind of twiddling our thumbs. We knew that we didn't want to keep working on that because we got the impression that this is going to be scrapped.
Yeah. So like bosses basically said, yeah, this isn't what we're doing.
Yeah.
We still had the React Native app, but then
and I think they had kind of like nudged us, like, like you guys can kind of keep working on that. But I think both of us were literally like, well, where do we fall in this company now? Like, where do we see ourselves?
Yeah.
So I think you and I wanted to solidify ourselves as decision makers. We can get stuff done. We can figure things out. And so we were just like, you know what? Instead of wasting any more time on that app that they obviously don't like, because I mean, one option was to maybe reconstruct that a little bit, but we
also had no back end. We had no back end on that.
Yeah. So, and the other option was to continue with the React app, which we knew. I don't have any problems with React Native, but it did seem like because of how good we are at native development,
Yeah,
it just seemed like it was more hassle. It would just be better off just making a new one. And we knew the native APIs, and that was honestly a lot easier to work with than the React stuff. Finding third-party libraries to do random stuff, whether it's in-app purchases, or we just wanted to work with the things that we were familiar with. So we just decided to rebuild what we already had, knowing that like if there's anything we want to do in the future, we are extremely comfortable with that. Whereas with React Native, we could figure it out, but like I know for a fact if I need to do in-app purchases in native, no problem.
There's no problem. Yeah, there's going to be documentation. It's obviously built for native.
Yeah. But working with React, plus with React Native, we knew that in the application that we were building, I mean, this is good advice for anybody looking to go into the React Native route. Like, I don't want to go down this whole rabbit hole, but one thing I don't really like about React Native is that I think it incentivizes developers to become app developers without understanding the underlying platform. I don't like that. Like, you do need to learn, because the reality is you wind up making decisions about what you should do with your app based on the third-party libraries available to you. And if you don't know native, I mean, you can, with React Native, you can definitely create whatever native component you want and inject that into your React app. But you can't.
But if they hire a web developer to build something, like a React developer to build a React Native app, they're not necessarily going to know iOS and Android.
Yeah, and if you have some really custom component, we had this problem with graphs. Like getting like rounded corners on a graph was really frustrating because we were trying to use a third-party library that didn't support it, so we had to go edit that library. In the end of the day, it would just be faster just to make it myself. So anyways, so we decided to go ahead and build that native and get rid of the React stuff. And in the end, that was like the best decision that we could have made. The bosses were really happy because now we've got a platform that can really rocket us forward. We can be really proud of the code base. You and I have architected mobile projects before, whereas with React, I mean, I've architected web projects, but not an app, and I don't know if they're exactly different. I just know that what I had worked.
I think connecting this back to what we were doing, we built it very fast. Like we did know where we wanted to go. We didn't have like a roadmap. It was nice because we had we had the back end endpoint, so we didn't need any back end work done. And we had all we were doing is like copying the current design from the React Native app. So there was some stuff that was given to us, but like we said, I think we can rebuild this on both platforms in like a month. Yeah. I think it took us a month and a half. Maybe iOS took a month and Android took a month and a half. I forget.
It was really quick.
But it was really quick. And this was, again, like all of this stuff.
Well, I mean, like since we're
motivated
talking about
individuals.
Let's go back to the manifesto, and we literally covered all of these. So individuals and interactions over processes and tools. I mean,
did we use processes and tools? We sat next to each other every day and said, okay, like, what are we going to do here?
Yep.
Like
how can I help you here? How can you help me? Yeah. What are you doing here? Making sure that we're in line.
I don't even think we kept Jira tickets. We might have.
I literally don't think we did.
Yeah. Or like, I don't know.
If we did, it was like insanely simple stuff. So, I mean, we definitely did that. Working software. That speaks
like,
for
okay,
itself.
I can log in.
Yeah.
Okay, like that was it. Okay, here I have this screen that shows this button. Okay, now I can log in. Okay, now I can sign up. I can't do anything in the app, but it's like it's working, right? It's like one step at a time.
Okay, so this is interesting to me. So I wonder if what we think this means is different. To me, what working software over comprehensive documentation, when I hear that, what that means to me is we're writing software, getting it working, getting it out there, but we're not spending an insane amount of time writing Confluence documents, writing documentation in the code. We're just getting the software working.
That's exactly correct.
Yeah, not having all of this, we're not having email trails and all of the, we're getting software working.
There's nothing that proves to upper management that this works except for come to my desk and look at this.
And we did this in a demo.
Oh,
You remember that? Like a month after we did it, or a month and a half, we literally went into a demo and we're like, this is what we have to show for our last month and a half. Boom. And it's working.
It's working.
We can deploy this.
Yeah.
So we did that.
We did that, yeah.
Customer collaboration. This one's interesting because in an indirect way, we did do this because with the first version of the app, that was responding to the customer's needs, which was, we want an app. You've given us this platform, but I don't always want to go to a website. So, I mean, that is us collaborating with the customer, trying to come up with a solution that works for them, make the experience better.
I would say in this case, I guess this is maybe the interpretation. I definitely agree with what you're saying. I guess it still is that. But I would say the customers were our bosses, right? Especially at that point, because we were actually like, we didn't spend a whole lot of time trying to negotiate with them. They were actually, I think they were like at a conference or something. They were out of town for like a good chunk of when we started this anyway.
Yep, that's true.
I don't remember exactly how long, but but you could say like our customer collaboration with the bosses was the V1. Like that's kind of what made it easy. And like we obviously had like a short, you could even say like the 6 weeks was our sprint. Then we came back, but even before that, again, customer wasn't there, but we knew what they wanted because it was literally what they had. Like they had the React Native version of those designs that were already approved. So in a way, we didn't do contract negotiation over like what are these features, but like they had this design that they had already approved. Obviously, like the back end already worked. So all we did was we made the guess, like the assumption, hope that they would prefer this exact app that they have, but native.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we made that decision for them. Obviously, the customer's not going to know what that means, but the customer wants a more bug-free app. They want one that crashes less. They want one that performs better.
Yeah, because the current React Native app, especially I think on Android, there was something, because I remember fixing a bug with
the web views.
The web view, something like that. And it was leaking memory, like not your fault. That was actually like built in. That was like a flaw in the web view on.
Which is also a third-party library.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, so I mean, this one, all these kind of just speak for themselves. The last one is just insane.
Yeah.
Obviously, we responded to change.
Yeah.
We did not follow a plan there.
Yeah.
There was zero plan.
There was no plan. And that's the thing is, like, we didn't, like, there was no plan for an app. We made that decision trying to get out working software. But also, day to day, we didn't follow a plan.
Yeah.
What's the most important feature? Let's make it so we can log in today.
Yep.
That's it. Like that's okay. Let me get this screen. Let me make it so I can log in. Okay, what's next? Well, people want to be able to sign up. Okay, what's next? Let's get these web views so that they have, like that was it. Like we were just thinking, what's the next feature? What's the next feature? What's the next feature?
Yeah.
And it worked. It worked really well.
So I mean, the point to take away from this is, especially if a business owner, I don't imagine they are, but if a business owner is hearing this message, then
you're listening.
Yeah, maybe you'll be one day. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, like developers need to act like business owners, and wherever you fall in the hierarchical, tree of your company, this should matter to you.
I think it's good advice. Can you say what the bosses told you when you got hired? Like treat the app like it's your company. I just said it, but like
yeah. Well, I mean, and to me, that was definitely that solidified like. Yes, you guys are who I want to work for. You guys obviously embody the values that, the fact that they let us do this, there was no pushback and they accepted it when it was over. We did we not only made their business better, and from a product perspective in our department, I would say this is the most significant thing we've ever done. And we've done some crazy features. This is the most significant thing that we've done for sure in the history of the project. When we hire anybody, we always talk about this because this was our most agile time. This was the most significant time in terms of progress. And anyways, like at the end of the day, we got the business owners what they wanted. They were happy. We solidified trust between us and them.
Yeah.
So just all around, like I can imagine that if you're a business owner considering agile or considering doing it the right way, some of this can be scary. But once you do it right, like something like this, it's like, okay, that makes sense. I see. Everybody's happy. The developers are happy. They've got a great amount of work satisfaction right now. They are building what they want to build. Even Jocko, he doesn't even know software development. And in a way, he kind of talks about this because he says, like, if somebody comes to me and they say that I want to do this thing, if I don't agree with it, 9 times out of 10, I'm gonna watch them. I'm gonna let them do that thing. And then when it's over, if what they did was good, okay, I can trust them. Now I can put more faith in them with future ideas. I can give them more responsibility. That person's happy. They trust me more. Jocko doesn't even know it, and he's talking about agile software development.
And then he talks about decentralized command, which is also
yes, absolutely.
What is it? The bottom one again. The best architectures, requirements, and the designs emerge from self-organizing teams.
Yep.
So it's not necessarily top down. Like it just wouldn't work. Even our VP of engineering or like our CTO wouldn't properly be able to architect. They don't know enough to architect the Android and the iOS app. If they did, that would be cool, but that's why we got hired.
Yep.
So like, of course, who's going to architect it better? Like their job is to architect maybe the entire software stack, but like it's my job to architect the Android.
What
like,
did Steve Jobs say? I didn't hire you to tell you what to do. I hired you to tell me what to do.
Yeah.
I mean, bingo, like right there.
That's
If
exactly,
you're going to hire somebody, do not hire somebody that you're going to sit, like, if you don't trust them, then don't hire them. Bottom line.
Yeah.
Like, because at the end of the day, you're going to be miserable. You're going to waste more time micromanaging them.
Mm-hmm.
And believe me, that developer is miserable.
Yeah.
He does not want you sitting over him. If you can't trust him, get rid of him. And I mean, that is the unfortunate reality of business. We've both been there. We've seen what that looks like. It's tragic. It sucks. But like, if you do have somebody that you have to micromanage, then probably that's not a good fit, especially in a startup environment. I guess that's the thing. We're talking a lot about this in terms of how it relates to startups. Like if somebody working at Facebook or Google might be like, what are you guys talking about? This is not complicated at all. But I feel like everybody's worked for a startup. They can all understand. I mean, we're obviously talking about this for growing businesses. And when we talk about growing business, these can still be businesses that generate over hundreds of millions of dollars a year. I mean, that by Agile standards can still be very screwed up, can still be very messed up. One question I want to ask you, I know you talked about this a minute ago, but it hasn't left my brain, and I've been waiting to ask you, because you seem like you have more of an opinion on this than me. You talk a lot about the duration of sprints. If you had a company, what would you do? And I guess why do you because like this is something that I never have really thought too much about. Like if I come into a company and they say, I mean obviously most often it's 2-week sprints, but if they say 2-week sprints, I'm usually just like, okay, cool. Then I'm going to plan things based on how much work I can get done in 2 weeks. But why do you have an opinion? I'm sure you have a good reason.
So it depends on what the goal of the sprint is, right? If the goal of the sprint is literally just checking in, and that's what they say, at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts the behavior. We do that a little bit at the company, but even in the Scrum book, we don't. I had you get those links, but it doesn't really matter.
Which one? This one?
No, it's the other one.
Oh, so this is Scrum.
This is just by Jeff Sutherland. He was one of the guys who signed that. I'm rereading this, but he was saying like we kind of do this. We ask these questions, but like we always say like what went well, what went right, and then like what are the actions. So I guess it's like we're going through the motions, but it really is about like not what specifically, but how. Like how well did we do? What actual processes can we do? And maybe we're just not as good at effectively like updating our like cadence or whatever, or like effectively like getting the blockers out of the way. But that is kind of the point.
So do you think that it would be are you suggesting that maybe people trial different durations to see what works best for them,
or just so doing that regular intervals where you reflect on stuff isn't my problem. So 2 weeks is fine. The reason that I have an opinion on the duration was because like we have worked on, especially like after that initial push of getting the app done in a month and a half, then we had to get purchases done, and we said okay, that might take. It might take 2 sprints or whatever, or we might say, oh, it's going to take 2 weeks. But what I've seen with our team is a lot of times these features they certainly take longer than 2 weeks. So it's like we don't necessarily have working software after 2 weeks because the feature is bigger. Yeah. So that's all. It's like, okay, what if we were basing our sprint, because it doesn't even have to be equal. What if we were basing our sprint off of how large we think this feature is?
I was just about to ask you that. Do you think that could be a good strategy, is adjusting your sprints throughout the year based on the complexity of the features that you're working on?
I don't know. That's the thing.
I mean,
yeah. So I don't know if that's good, because one of the things that he's also talking about in the book is obviously like measuring velocity, because like you can't even predict when something is going to be done until you figured out how much work, and that's where some of this process comes in. How much work do you reasonably think you can do in this set amount of time?
Yeah.
But again, that's so hard to quantify, so I don't even know if that's valuable. But like, I just know that with us, with the features we were doing, with the resources that we had for like new back-end development, a lot of things took 6 weeks.
Yeah.
That's it. Like it took a month to 6 weeks. So like we can meet every 2 weeks, And like I said, reflecting on how well we're doing, there's nothing wrong with that. But we just don't always have working software after 2 weeks because the feature just takes longer. So that's and like I said, at that other company that I worked for, when the guy was saying, well, I wanted to refactor because I know that we're going to have to touch this code again and do the exact same thing again. I can just, why do it 3 or 4 times in a row? Yeah. Why not just spend a little bit of time working on it?
And it does feel like by doing it every 2 weeks, in a way, it is kind of taking away from both your physical time because you're having to like do these meetings and talk about these retrospectives and everything. But not only that, but like mentally, you kind of like towards the end of that 2 weeks, you get in this little cycle of like, okay, we're winding down. We're kind of looking back at everything. Like for sure, the last day of every sprint is probably in general everybody's least productive day. Typically, it's a Friday, which doesn't help. But also, again, you're kind of like you're reining your thoughts in for this meeting. You're kind of getting everything prepared for your demonstration and your retrospective. So maybe I think it probably can be. I mean, if you have a team of even 2 to 30 developers, like that can be costly to have even 4 to 8 hours of developer work that kind of vanish because you're doing this too often.
Just because, or the other problem is, again, if the feature can't be completed within the sprint, and depending on how rigid the company is about those sprints, and they said you have to get your stuff done. This is what you're committing to, so you have to get it done, right? Then maybe you're. It's not that you're putting in less effort, but you're focused on the deadline more than the artificial deadline, let's say, more than like code quality.
That is a really good point because in a 2-week sprint, that is kind of like there's nothing about 2 weeks that makes that the time that it should take to do a feature. So you're right. I mean, in the end, you might sacrifice code quality because you're trying to get something rushed out before the end because you want it for that demo or whatever, even though it might need 8 hours more of work or 8 hours more of testing. You're trying to meet that deadline, which is completely artificial. That's a really good point. Or it could also mean that you're hurting the company in terms of productivity because now somebody's like, well, I'm done a week early and I'm going to kind of ride the waves until we get to the end. Another thing, I mean, we could chase this down a rabbit hole, but one thing that you mentioned earlier that I think is also kind of tough to figure out in a company is your like developing and QA schedule and how that works into a sprint because that's another thing that everybody treats differently is like, do you try to do the feature and the QA in the same sprint? Does a QA do another sprint? Do you wait 3 sprints to do a deployment? This is another thing that I wish somebody would come out with like a standardized like, hey, this is generally how things should flow with your QA, with your dev, with your deployment. I mean, those are 3 really independent things that you have to figure out when you're planning your sprint, and there's no, as far as I know, there's no standardized way of doing that.
Yeah, every company I've worked for has done it differently. The deployment is a little bit different, but when QA happens, doesn't matter to me. Within this process, the fact is, if I come out with a feature, like we should all be working together. Like ideally, we are all working together on a single feature. Unfortunately, that might mean that QA is has nothing to do. There's never nothing to do, but like QA has nothing to do until we get more work on this feature. But honestly, like hopefully anyway, I'm building some stuff that QA is able to test, also incrementally. And so as long as you're not worried about that 2-week process, then, and again, if the team is collaborating, like the interactions, then okay, hey, I got this. Can you take a look at it? Try to break it or whatever, right? As I'm building this second piece. Oh no, I found these 2 bugs. Okay, let me get back to that. So that's why
that feels agile.
That's what I'm saying. That feels very agile. The point isn't to meet sprint goals. I mean, it is, but like the point to me isn't the sprints at all. Like the sprints are just reflection periods, and I'm okay with that. The point is to get the feature done.
Yeah.
I think that's where we lose focus. Like with waterfall or whatever method, like people do pretend to do agile. Like the problem is like they're looking down. Okay, in 3 months we need all of this work done.
Yeah.
But I think that also gets people less excited, especially as programmers. We want to build stuff. Like I know that it sucks when you say you want to build stuff and there's two ways bosses can approach this. It's like, hey, I want to build this thing. No, just do it this bad way, right? And it's like, well, you'll like just do it this bad way. Eventually, as the code starts to suck, it's not fun to work in it anymore, right? But also, so that's one way that bosses can approach it, and that's like the story that I told you about that last job. But also, we do something pretty good at our job, even, right? Again, it sounds like we're always tooting our own horns, but like we do understand the concept of that MVP. So like there are cases where, okay, we don't have the time to build this API feature. So we're gonna build it architecturally pretty good. We're gonna have like this mock data. We'll put that in the app, and then it's hard coded, but it's kind of like tucked away so that like the view that's interacting with it doesn't care where it came from. It's just like yeah. So we do that, and that's the thing is, again, engineers like to solve problems. So if you say, how can we make it flexible for now, or how can we make it work now but flexible for the future, instead of just like, no, do it the bad way.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing with whenever I first got hired. I know you weren't exactly there for this part, but it's something that we've definitely dealt with together. When I first got hired, the goal was to get an app out again within like 2 months or 3 months or whatever it was. It was a really short timeline, and they were basically asking like, "Is this possible?" And it took me a minute to get them an answer back, because if we would have done everything the right way, no way.
Yeah.
Like, but when I say right way, I get it's not that we did it the wrong way. It was just like it could have been all native, and it could have been this great, beautiful experience. But in the end, it was like, well, let's take some stuff from the website, put it in a web view, for example, which is really common. Like a lot of apps do that. I know everybody would love to do things differently, but like the reality was we wanted to get something live. And by the way, the app has great ratings, like, and it always did, and nobody ever had a problem with that. And I think people, especially business owners, can get the guys we work for are not like this at all, and I love that about them. A lot of business owners can want just the most perfect product to ship, and if that's your mindset, either you're never going to get to deployment, which is going to be a problem. I mean, a lot of even Gary Vee talks about this. Like, you got to get your business live. You got to get the product live,
and that's ready, fire, aim as well.
Right.
Like that's it. Like get it live.
Yep.
As opposed to okay, I can build you the perfect app in 18 months.
Yeah. Yep.
That sounds very waterfall.
Yep.
Like a lot of things have to come together perfectly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, especially if you've got a group of customers or a group of users that are telling you that they want something. I think like Apple is starting to struggle with this problem. A super stupid simple example of this is that guy Marcus on YouTube. He's got that big YouTube tech channel. I think I might have mentioned this in another episode. I can't remember. But basically, he asked oh my God, what's the guy's name? One of the executives.
Cook.
No, not Tim Cook. He's the guy that's got like the wicked unibrow and like he does all this stuff. Doesn't matter. Anyways, he's a big wig exec. People know who I'm talking about. I'll remember it as soon as we turn off the camera. But anyways, he did an interview with him, and he said, like your users, everybody wants a weather and a calculator app on the iPad. These seem like really simple. I mean, got it on iPhone. Like, why not have it on the iPad? Like, people are definitely wanting a calculator or to check the weather on an iPad. And he was like, well, here at Apple, we like to make sure that things are exceptional and unique and whatever whenever we deploy them. And it's like, no, dude, your users want a weather app. Like,
and also, Steve Jobs was not like that. Like,
in a way, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is half and half. He seemed perfectionist, but he shipped the first iPhone. Like, it didn't have like a copy and paste feature.
Yeah.
You couldn't
have backgrounds.
Yeah, it also wasn't perfect. At some point, you got to ship. At some point,
That's
do got to ship.
I can get behind that. In general, I think Steve Jobs was a perfectionist in the sense that he wouldn't, as much as possible, he wouldn't ship anything that was broken. But you might be lacking features that users want. But my point is, what I was trying to say is, users on iPad want a calculator and a weather app, and they're not giving it to them. And it's like, you can always make it better later. The first time, like, Apple's seriously not. And I'm kind of, in a way, I'm sort of an Apple fanboy, even though they're starting to drive me crazy lately. But like, they're not embodying that spirit of like, let's satisfy the customers, give them what they want. I mean, it's not like if Apple took the iPhone weather app and deployed it on iPad, it would look bad. It would be fine. It wouldn't be exceptional. It wouldn't be any different. But like, I would just like to check the weather on my iPad.
And then 2 months later, you can improve it.
Iterate.
Now you have something to improve.
Yeah.
That's iterate. That's exactly it.
Yeah. So that's the whole point. Is like, as a business owner, you've got to get in that mindset of like, it doesn't have to be perfect. Let's satisfy what the users want. At the end of the day, with our company that we work for now, the users were begging to have an app. They were tired of going onto the website just to access their content. They wanted something that could maybe even like have some form of local storage that could remember things about them, remember where they left off or whatever. That's what users wanted, and we gave it to them. And it wasn't perfect, and over time it's gotten a heck of a lot better. But I mean, we satisfied the customers, and that's cool to me because that's a customer-centered company. You're going to be more successful if that's who you are,
of course,
as opposed to a business owner that thinks like, I'm just going to do what I think I want. 999 times out of 10, you're wrong. Your customers want something different than what you think they want.
Yeah. Actually, this is, now we're in a whole different conversation. Maybe we don't need to go this way. But Steve Jobs was famous for saying the customer doesn't know what they want. I'm going to give them what they want, or something like that.
Yeah. Steve Jobs was a unique person, though.
Yeah.
Like, you've said this before, like, you're probably not Steve Jobs.
Yeah. Like if you're in a fight and you're thinking about throwing a kick, ask yourself, like, are you Bruce Lee?
Yeah.
So if you're not Bruce Lee, then don't throw a kick.
In a way, I guess I do see that we're sort of off topic, but in a way we're kind of not, because again, in Agile, you're constantly responding to the customer's needs.
Yeah.
And and that obviously that happens after deployment too.
Yeah.
So
when we were teaching it, again, like I wasn't the game teacher. I taught just the programming part, but I would help out with a game lecture. So I never gave lectures on Agile and extreme programming or whatever. But I definitely remember hearing about iteration. And like, so far I haven't run into that. And anything I've been reading lately, nobody specifically says iteration, but I absolutely do think that's part of it. And so it's like, get something working and then get it working better. And so, like, just because it's not formally put, or maybe it is somewhere and I just haven't seen it, but I definitely think that's a big part of it. And that is what we talked about when we were, like I said, when we were teaching it.
Yeah.
Like, iterate over this thing, and you can make it better.
Yeah.
And we have, like, with our current app.
Yeah.
That's definitely true.
True. Yeah. I think this is actually a really good topic for us to get into next week on the podcast, like talking about, you know, what it looks like. I mean, we've talked about Agile, what that business structure looks like, but maybe next week it's good. We could talk about like what solid deployment practices look like, what, what iteration looks like, all that. So to kind of like end this one off, I think we can talk, we didn't mention this other book that you wanted people to check out.
So the reason, I think the reason why I even got into some of these discussions with project managers was because I've never read any Agile software development book, except for this one. This one is written by Robert Martin, who's written Clean Code, Clean Architecture, and this came out 1 year after the Agile Manifesto. I've read this book cover to cover, and I read some of his other books cover to cover. He wrote like Clean Code. And so I remember reading this book. It's called Agile Software Development. It is like 90%
Straight
code.
to the point.
Yeah, well, it is 90% code. And that's why, like, I kept, I would talk with these project managers, or like at a different company I work for. I talked with this guy he was working hard on like a business requirements document, like this BRD called. They kept talking about the BRD, and it was this big document. And I think because in this book he does mention the Agile Manifesto. It's like right at the beginning, and all I remembered was working software over comprehensive documentation. And then there's this I don't remember his title, project manager or something. But he was building this big documentation. I just said, like, I'm genuinely curious. I said, I'm always worried about this, especially when it's like, I don't know who's my boss or whatever. And I'm just like, I just don't understand, but how is this Agile? Because, like, we're building this big document, but what if things change? And he gave me an answer, and I just assumed that I didn't understand. Okay, but the reason I brought up this book, and now I'm more confident in bringing up this book because I've been paying attention. Like I said, it's 90% code. And the reason it is 90% code is because this is about writing flexible code to adapt to the changes in your code base, which is also like at least one last point for me, which I think is really important, is software is a different beast. Like, I was thinking about it. Like, if you, like, actually, the podcasts are a perfect example. When we make a podcast, we record it, you do some editing to it, and then we put it out there. Right? It's out in the world. We're basically never going to touch it again.
Yeah.
Imagine if we were like, okay, I'm going to cut out this part and put in this other part. That's going to require a lot more editing, right? So imagine if we had one episode and we just kept taking out pieces and putting in new pieces. Eventually, it would just be incoherent unless we really spent a lot of time editing it.
Yeah.
So the thing is that doesn't need to happen with things like podcasts or whatever. But that is exactly how we deal with software. And so that's what makes it so complex. We need it to be this coherent thing, but it's also always changing. And there's nothing wrong with it always changing, but we and the project managers and whoever, like, we have to understand that there is, like, the code is really important. It was one of the principles, focusing on like excellent code, but also like in this book, it's like, okay, how do we write code that will help us adapt to change? Like, we have to expect that some of this stuff, and you can go overboard with that. And I've seen, even in his book, he has some examples of, it's not in this book. I've seen some examples of other people kind of going overboard where, like, literally every variable has the possibility of changing. And like, that's like a little bit rough. So again, like there's a balance there, but I did think it was interesting when I would talk with other project managers. Again, now I'm maybe more confident about it. It's like, okay, well, the guy who started it, like the guys who started this, when they talk about, like, the guys who started Agile and Scrum, they were programmers, and they talk about it from the coding standpoint. But then when we do it in practice, like at these companies, it doesn't feel like we're doing it from the coding perspective. And that's where there was a disconnect for me.
Yeah, and sometimes I think you're right. I think that's a big takeaway is it seems like a lot of times when teams are put in place to help manage projects, the core of the core driver is not usually the software, and it should be. That's what we're in business for.
Again,
let's focus
get out
on
those
that.
features. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that another big takeaway from all this is that Agile is seemingly complex. I don't think it's as complex as people make it out to be. And so one thing that you had mentioned that I kind of want to show, which I think is funny, is everybody's got an opinion about Agile. And if you look up Agile on Amazon, you've got to scroll down pretty far before you even get to an author that created Agile.
Yeah,
you got to get all the way down here to Jeff Sutherland.
Yeah, so I don't know. Like, I'm not saying none of those people are famous above, but like, none of those did the Agile Manifesto. That guy, Agile Estimation and Planning, that's Robert Martin. That's not his original, but that's one of his books.
Yeah, it's and that's also not to say that these aren't good books.
Yeah,
they might also be really good books. But I think the point is, for me, is like, with something as crucial as Agile to your company, if that's what you practice, like, go to the source, find the people that talked about this. Reading the manifesto in and of itself is going to give you a much deeper understanding if you can really internalize those things and think about how they apply to your company.
Are we doing these things, these 4 things?
Exactly. And again, that's something that you can look back on during conversations to make sure that you guys are driving in the right direction. And then if you need more documentation, there's some great books, and I mean, I think this is what you're suggesting too. Go read the ones by the authors that made it.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily recommend. Well, it is a good coding book. So if you're a programmer, definitely read. I like spending 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night reading coding books on my iPad. That's me. That helps me sleep well at night. If you're a non-programmer. So like, if you're a programmer, I think it helps to read those books like that. If that's how you learn, I think that helps. That's pretty pretty code heavy. But if you're not, and like, if you think you're a Scrum expert, or you are like an Agile project manager or whatever, read the original text. Read it by the guy who invented Scrum.
Yep.
Like, like I said, I read it a long time ago. I'm rereading it, and it's blowing my mind because of how different. Now I've lived it. And I'm not done with it this time around. But I'm guessing that this is the only book you need.
Yeah.
Honestly. Like they are covering it like really well. And like, not 100% of the practices, but he's talking about like where these things came from. And again, if you know like the first principles, then you can apply them to real life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people should read these frequently. If you're an employee or you're an owner, read the manifesto, read these books frequently. I for sure. I mean, I already know reading that now versus reading it when I first saw it. It has profound meaning, new profound meaning to me.
Because I think
it probably will every year.
Yeah, yeah. I think it helps because no, I mean it's the exact same with me, right? Like, okay, I read these things, and maybe it's true. The first time you read about design patterns in programming. Right. You're learning programming. You learn some design patterns. And you're like, okay, I kind of get this. Why would I need a factory or whatever? And then you start programming for a while, and then maybe you even kind of used a factory. And then 3 or 4 years later, you look at it and you go, oh yeah, like I guess I am doing this stuff. This helps make things more flexible or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's where I think even Agile Manifesto. I probably read that also a long, long time ago, but now I've lived it and been through some rough or like. I just laugh at it now, but like some like laughable experiences at different companies, and then I go, oh yeah, these are important. These are good.
Yeah, this stuff has for sure. I mean that's a good way to put it. Yeah, I mean this stuff has profound meaning, and if you read it, I think it can really have the difference. If you really internalize this stuff, it can really be the difference between you enjoying where you're at and not, and helping the business owners, helping the other employees find their place in the company, find purpose, find satisfaction, find find clarity, honestly, more than anything. So anyways, I mean I think that's a good place for us to wrap up here. We're gonna say it again, please check us out on social media, check us out on the Discord channel. By the way, we
ask questions on Twitter. I try to be on Twitter every day. I at least look at it multiple times a day. I'm trying to do more engagement. Ask me questions. I love it.
Yep. And by the way, real quick, we didn't know in the last episode, I still don't know if we know the answer, but now we are through episode 8. So if that was the cutoff point, we beat it. We're still going.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, I can't wait to get to episode 100.
Yeah.
So
104. That'll be 2 years of doing it every week.
Yeah.
Roughly, yeah.
Just a little under 2 years if we don't take off breaks. So if anything, we're probably going to start recording more often. So
yeah.
Anyways.
I'm cool with that.
Yep. Thank everybody for tuning in. Again, as always, we appreciate the support, and we'll see you next week. Later, y'all.